Hello everybody. Today we're going to be discussing the circulatory system and the respiratory system. We're going to start off with the circulatory system, which is also called the cardiovascular system. Alright. So the primary structures of the circulatory system are the heart, blood vessels, and blood. The primary functions are to transport oxygen and nutrients and to remove waste from tissues. Now we're going to start talking about the anatomy or the structure of the heart. The heart muscle itself, remember that the heart is a muscle, not an organ. If you remember from the muscle unit and the tissues unit, we talked about cardiac muscle tissue. The heart is a muscle, not an organ. Remember that. That's a very important piece of information. Anyway, the heart muscle is composed of two major chambers, the atria and the ventricles. There are two of each. There's a left and a right atria and a left and a right ventricle. The left atria receives blood from the body. Well, atria in general receive blood from the body. And then ventricles pump blood through the heart. Breaking it down a little further, we have veins and arteries. Veins carry blood into the heart, where arteries carry blood out of the heart. Almost every vein in the body carries oxygen-poor blood, which means there's not a lot of oxygen in it. The only exception being the pulmonary vein, because the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. Same thing with the arteries. They carry blood out of the heart, and the majority of them carry oxygen-rich blood. The pulmonary artery is the only exception to this because it carries oxygen-poor blood out of the heart and into the lungs for gas exchange to occur. On the next slide, you're going to be able to visualize this in the picture I have of the heart. So here's a picture of the interior view of the heart. Circulation begins in the vena cava, which are veins. You have the inferior and superior vena cava. Superior and inferior are just anatomical directional terms, so you just need to know that they're vena cava. From here they enter the right atrium, and through the tricuspid valve, which is right here, they enter the right ventricle. They then go into the pulmonary artery, with still oxygen-poor blood, to go to the lungs, where oxygen exchange occurs. They then enter the heart again through the pulmonary veins, and they enter the left atrium. They go through the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve and enter the left ventricle, where they are then taken through the aorta, which is the largest artery in the body, and it is transported to the body. It's transported to different parts of the body. Also, you'll see in this picture coronary arteries. There are coronary arteries and coronary veins. The coronary arteries and veins are the two types of arteries and veins, or the arteries and veins that supply blood and remove waste from the heart muscle. So when you hear of somebody having a heart attack, it's not because of their aorta or their vena cava, it's because of their coronary arteries getting clogged. The coronary arteries provide blood and oxygen to the heart muscle itself. Here's a picture of a pulmonary and systemic circuit to kind of better explain the pathway of blood. You start with the vena cava entering the heart in the right atrium, going to the right ventricle. This is all with oxygen-poor or CO2-rich blood. It enters the pulmonary veins and goes to the lungs, where through the capillary beds, oxygen exchange occurs. Now you have oxygen-rich blood entering the heart and through the pulmonary veins and into the left atrium, through the left ventricle, out of the aorta and branches to the rest of the body, to where through capillary beds of body tissues, gas exchange occurs again. What this means is oxygen is being given to the tissues, and waste, basically CO2, is being taken from the tissues and being brought back through veins to the heart for the cycle to be continued again. Here's a little picture of arteries and veins. It starts with arteries, and then it breaks down to arterioles, which are basically smaller arteries. From here we get to capillaries. This is where oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood kind of mix. This is the only place it's okay for oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood to mix, because this is where the gas exchange occurs. From there we go to venules, which are small veins, and then veins. If you refer back to this picture, these valves prevent the mixing of oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood. Here's something to think about, relating back to the muscle unit. How does a muscle contraction create blood flow? Or how does muscle contraction help to create blood flow? I want you to think about that. I'll give you about 5 seconds. Alright, so that basically sums up the circulatory system of what I want to cover with it. Now we're going to move on to the respiratory system. The respiratory system is breathing, and the different structures associated with breathing, and it sort of preludes itself to the digestive system because it contains a lot of the similar structures. But today we're going to focus on the breathing aspect of it, or the respiratory system. The primary structures of the respiratory system are the nose, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, and the lungs, which contain alveoli, which are air sacs where the actual oxygen exchange occurs. Primary functions are breathing and gas exchange. Oxygen comes into the body, carbon dioxide leaves the body. Here's a picture of the respiratory tracts. You see you have the nose, and then from the nose you have the pharynx or the throat, you have the larynx, which is the voice box, you have the trachea, the bronchi, and then the lungs. Within the lungs are alveoli membranes. From the pharynx up is the upper respiratory tract, from the larynx down is the lower respiratory tract. The pharynx's function is a passage of food and air. And here's a little picture of the pharynx. The larynx is simply the vocal box, or the voice box. The trachea is a passage of air to and from the lungs. The bronchi consists of bronchioles and alveolar ducts. The bronchioles are smaller ducts, and the alveolar ducts lead to the alveoli. Alveoli. A little bit of a tongue twister. Alveolar ducts lead to the alveoli. So you have the bronchioles, the alveolar duct, and then the alveoli, and then the alveolar sacs. You also have bronchial trees, which has the alveoli, or the air sacs, which is the functional unit of gas exchange. This is where the oxygen and CO2 cross and mix to have this gas exchange occur through diffusion. The alveolar gas exchange, oxygen enters the blood and carbon dioxide leaves the blood. So the respiratory system and the circulatory system work very hand in hand, because the respiratory system is how the oxygen and carbon dioxide work together to eliminate waste and to produce oxygen to give to the rest of the body. Keeping on with the bronchiolar tree, the function of it is to allow air to directly enter and leave the lungs. Gas exchange happens in the alveoli. So this little picture's a little diagram of that. Blood low in oxygen, high in carbon dioxide enters, and then blood low in carbon dioxide, high in oxygen leaves. This is through the diffusion as air moves in and out of the alveolus. So through diffusion, carbon dioxide leaves as you breathe out, oxygen comes in as you breathe in. And then the oxygen is brought to the blood cells, and then CO2 leaves the blood cells. So this is all done through diffusion. Next we have the lungs, which basically create pressure changes to move air. And then here you'll see you have the diaphragm muscle, which is, singers know, the muscle that helps to produce more air, or more breath support. Continuing with the lungs, the primary function is inspiration and expiration, breathing in and breathing out, and gas exchange. So here's just a picture of the lungs. You'll notice that the left lung is a little smaller than the right lung. This is because the apex of the heart, or the bottom peak of the heart, is in this area. So you need the space for the heart, therefore the lung is a little smaller. Going to the breathing and description of breathing, the movement of the diaphragm muscle in the rib cage creates a change in air pressure in inhalation and exhalation. This is a basic summary of how breathing happens. So your diaphragm muscle contracts and your rib cage opens or expands to create air pressure in inhalation and exhalation, so you can open your air passages to get more air in. We're going to be doing a lung capacity lab later on in class, and we're going to be comparing tidal volume, expiratory reserve, and vital capacity. So I just want to make sure you guys know what these terms are. Tidal volume is the amount of air breathed in or out during normal respiration. So this is normal breathing in and out. Tidal volume, normal breathing. Next is the expiratory reserve, which is the largest amount of air that can be forced out of the lungs after a normal breath has already been breathed in. This is very similar to vital capacity, where vital capacity is the greatest volume of air that can be expelled from the lungs after taking the deepest possible breath. So the expiratory reserve is from the largest amount of air forced out after a normal breath. Vital capacity is after the deepest possible breath. So the greatest volume expelled after the deepest possible breath is vital capacity, and the expiratory reserve is after a normal breath. These two are can get a little confusing, but if you just remember that expiratory reserve, largest amount of air forced out after a normal breath. With an expiratory reserve, think of reserve as you're not getting rid of all the air. You have a backup reserve, or you have a reserve army, per se. You have backup air left because you aren't getting rid of all the air you have. This is after a normal breath, not the biggest breath. Where vital capacity, think of as much as you can. The greatest volume that can be expelled after taking the deepest breath possible. So we're going to be comparing these with a activity called the lung capacity and vital tidal volume lab. We're going to be using balloons, which will be kind of fun, and we're going to be measuring this and doing some analysis of it. So this basically sums up the notes on the respiratory system and the circulatory system. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. You all have my email, or you may email Miss Rayner if you choose. We will be applying these concepts in class to the tidal volume and lung capacity lab, and also in our final assessment you're going to be responsible for knowing all of this stuff. So again, if you have questions, email me. I hope this cleared up any questions, and have a good day. Bye.